Stefan's going to begin his presentation. So he's going to talk a little bit. He's going to talk about. Do you have a question?
No, I just want to suggest that he move that over there.
Yes. Okay. I'll have to move it up. Stefan, you want to move up a little closer?
I can.
Not
Sure.
just closer, so that everybody can see.
Yeah. Maybe just move it right
Their
over.
heads
Okay.
are in the leg.
Yeah, let me do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Samson's beard gets
So, and I can stand here.
So, just keep your talking down to like about like you need to for something that's important. He's going to talk about the topic is the Oriental and the Eastern Orthodox. Nice. You don't even know what that is, but you probably do once he gets talking. You'll hear about who the two groups are and their history and relationships.
You are politically correct.
Oriental Orthodox.
Yeah.
That's actually the common usage.
I wonder what word she's thinking of.
Yeah. You know it's funny because you know what the word Oriental means? It means Eastern.
Yeah.
So it's funny because it's just two different words.
Eastern.
It's
Yeah.
two different Eastern Orthodox churches. So, yeah, so we'll talk about those two groups. So, Stefan, go ahead and let you
Sure.
get started, okay?
Yeah, so, as Father said, there's Eastern Orthodox and there's Oriental Orthodox. These two groups are not in communion with one another. And it's been this way, well, it started because the groups we call the Oriental Orthodox don't accept the Council of Chalcedon, which for us is the Fourth Ecumenical Council, held in 451. The actual schism probably wasn't finalized until maybe the late 6th century. And so I spoke a bit about this last time when I was here in February, when I gave a lecture on liturgical rites. How many of you were there for that? Just so. Oh, wow. A whole new crowd. Awesome. All right. Well, so I'm going to start with just kind of naming the churches that make up the Eastern and the Oriental Orthodox so that we know exactly who we're talking about.
So the Eastern Orthodox is us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry if I didn't
Go
mention
blue team.
that. Oh, I guess I could do another card for Israel there. Yeah, green. All right. So the Eastern Orthodox, we have 15 autocephalous churches that we make up. Can I put all 15 on here?
So you guys know that there's actually 15 Orthodox churches in the world. 15.
15 Eastern Orthodox churches. Yeah. And some autonomous ones, but that's so basically autocephalous means self-headed. So these 15 churches they basically govern themselves, but they are in full communion with the rest of these. So anyone just want to throw out some names of Eastern Orthodox churches? Yeah. All right.
We're number 15.
Yeah.
What's the motto?
All right. Yeah. Now the.
You should need a different blue.
Yeah, because that's fading.
That one's like dying.
This one's. Hopefully this one's better. Okay. Oh, much better. Oh yeah. Okay. So someone said Greek. Now it's interesting because the Church of Greece is autocephalous, but the Greek Archdiocese here is under Constantinople. But they used to be under the Church of Greece, actually, for a few years. So I'll put, okay, so Constantinople's number 1. This is actually, I'm going to put them in the order that they're in, or what's called the diptychs, which...
Now wait, when you say Constantinople is number 1.
Number
What
1.
is that? Is that just the churches in Constantinople, or is that what?
It means... So in terms of what it means to be number 1,
Yeah.
so he's first among equals.
Oh, I see.
In
What
terms-
you're doing it that way, not by population.
No, oh, okay, yeah. I'm not doing it by the population. I'm doing it on the actual order of the diptychs.
I see.
Yeah,
It's
so...
like prestige and authority.
Yeah, so when Metropolitan Tikhon comes to the seminary, I'm usually the guy that holds his staff. And so I have to have this memorized because at certain mentions I'm supposed to do certain things. So, yeah, so it's easier for me just list them that way. So the Church of Greece is, I think that's right, that's number 11. Constantinople. Anyone else?
What about Russia?
Russia, yeah, they're number 5, so that's Moscow / Russia with that.
Serbian?
Yes, Serbia, I think they're numbered.
Bulgarian.
Yeah.
Well, Bulgarians before Serbs, right?
So
They have to.
no, I don't think they are.
Oh, yeah, because it's. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Because their autocephaly was taken back and then it was re-granted.
Okay.
Yeah. So, oh wait, actually I'm doing this. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I think Bulgaria is 9.
We won't know the
About the
difference, so if you're
lesser.
making an
Right?
error, we're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
gonna report you.
Okay.
Yes, I won't tell you that you can check the list on oca.org. I will not tell you that.
Syrian?
Ukrainian?
Ukraine's an interesting thing. So, the canonical church of the Ukraine is an autonomous church that's under Moscow. So maybe they'll be granted autocephaly one day, but you get autonomy first, and then you get autocephaly. But the Ukrainian churches here are actually under the Patriarchate of Constantinople, but they just have their own local bishops.
Now,
So I guess
we
I can
have a
mention
new church-
autonomous ones.
We have a new church that was built by us, a Melkite church.
Aren't they Catholic?
Yeah,
Catholic?
That's Eastern Rite Catholic.
yeah, in the modern day use of the word Melkite, that would be Roman Catholics in the Middle East that use the same liturgy we do, more in the Byzantine
Rite.
style.
Like Byzantine. Rite.
Yeah, so that wouldn't be on here because they're not a part of what we're speaking of.
Antiochian?
Yeah, Antioch. So Antioch is number 3. Yeah, you got it.
Cyprus.
Yeah.
Yep. Number 10.
Family Feud. I'm trying to fill in all the.
So is the Syrian under any of these? The Syrian or Syrian?
Syrian would be Antioch.
Yeah,
that's
unless we're talking about the
yeah.
Syriac church, which is Oriental, which we'll get into.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably John.
All right.
White.
I thought. Yeah, that makes.
Romanian Orthodox?
Yeah. Romania is. Oh, I didn't even finish the word Serbian. Romania is here. Yeah, I'm sorry.
We know what it is.
You get it.
All right.
Okay, yeah.
Who are the
Okay.
Japanese Orthodox?
Ethiopia.
They're an autonomous church under Moscow as well.
Ethiopia.
They're Oriental. I guess we can start doing the Oriental thing. Just that their diptychs are not as well defined as ours, so the order might not be
Yeah,
as
I'm like
accurate.
skipping Europe over.
I think there's.
After.
forget Poland.
You're right.
Poland's on there.
Poland.
Really? Okay, even though they're mostly Catholic.
Yeah, there's the eastern section of Poland is
That makes sense.
heavily Orthodox.
Right.
It's like this-
Poland.
Those are parts of Sweden.
What is it, Belarus?
Finland,
Yep.
heavily because it's close.
Belarus is also an autonomous church under Moscow.
So
But-
how many autonomous churches does Moscow have?
Let's see, Belarus, Ukraine, China, Japan, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
There's
Oh, and Rokor is technically an autonomous church under Moscow too now.
Yes.
So 4.5-ish or 5.
So Finland is not really.
Finland is autonomous under Constantinople,
Oh,
but one day.
Oh.
Same thing with Estonia. If anyone was going to ask that, they're autonomous under Constantinople.
Well, who's number 2?
Number 2.
What's it start with?
A. I'll give you a hint. They don't have churches over here. Well, no, Albania is number 12.
Yeah.
Armenian?
Well, they're on the Oriental side.
Hey.
Same-
Alexandria.
Yes.
Oh, you just couldn't hold it.
Yeah.
Man.
Yes.
I don't answer them all.
Yes, our Alexandrian Patriarchate does not have any churches over here. So,
Fill in the missing ones, let's go.
okay.
Let's see how good you are.
Who's number 4?
Come on, guys. Yes. Yes. You got it.
What is
All right.
that one?
There's only 2 more. It shares the name of a state.
Georgia.
Georgia.
Yeah.
Georgia.
Numbers. I think. Yeah. we should do those. Last one.
Czech.
Yep.
Czech land.
Nice.
Jack has a Orthodox church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a lot of Czech blood too.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Carpatho-Russian diocese, their last metropolitan actually strengthened the ties with the Czech Lands Church to kind of be like, this is somewhat of a mother church, even though their situation is different here. They like kind of were like, if you send your clergy here, please have them come serve in our churches and things like that. So yeah, they're I guess they're kind of a big deal. Yeah, so these are the 15 autocephalous churches that make up the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Now, could you talk, like, some of those are like the order. That's, you already mentioned how that's an order of sort of importance or prestige,
Yeah.
right? And just briefly, like how those happen, because some of it's chronological, whoever got
Yeah.
it first, but some of it, but not all of it.
Some of this is definitely above my pay grade because there's things that could go on that I'm not too sure about. I know that when Constantinople was shot all the way up to number 2 when it was made a patriarchate. Rome was number 1 at the time, but we're no longer in union with Rome, so they're not on this list. And I know for some of them, like, you know, we mentioned Bulgaria would theoretically be higher, but because they lost autocephaly and were granted it again, and at one point they weren't getting along so well with Constantinople, they kind of got pushed down. The 1 through 9 are all led by a patriarch. These
Okay.
are just led by either an archbishop or a metropolitan, and that's significant because
So
Cyprus,
Each one of these has a different head.
yes.
That's right.
Wouldn't it be nice if we all got together?
Well, we are. I mean, we're all in union. Theoretically, in the homelands, when you're in their turf, like, and you're Eastern Orthodox, you are a member of that church. They don't have the overlap there that we have here,
But
for the
all
most part.
bylaws and the rules are different.
Yeah, but I mean, they kind of follow the same spirit, I guess you could say. But you know, you have to cater towards your local community. But all like the main, like the canons of the ecumenical councils, you know, and all the, I guess, the really important stuff is all essentially the
I
same.
see.
Is this the order they pray, you know, like next week at OED Day? Isn't this the order at the liturgy that they pray for all when?
Yeah,
they
if
pray
Metropolitan
all the
Tikhon
bishops,
is there,
they mention
he
every
will-
single one of them.
Yes, Archdeacon Joseph Matuziak
Yeah,
will come out and just read off, and the
Yeah,
choir
all
will
these
repeat.
and all
Yep.
the names,
all of
and
them.
they pray prayers for them and everything like we do for the Metropolitan.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so Cyprus, even though they've been autocephalous since the Council of Ephesus in 431 proclaimed their autocephaly, they're still only number 10 because they just have an archbishop. They don't have, he's never been elevated to being a patriarch, or yeah, I can't remember if he's a metropolitan or not off the top of my head, but because even what an archbishop or a metropolitan is will vary between some of these, and sometimes a metropolitan is higher, or sometimes an archbishop is higher. Like in the Greek archdiocese here, Archbishop Demetrios is kind of like the primate of the Greek archdiocese, but then you have Metropolitan Evangelos in New Jersey, but he's a metropolitan, but technically Demetrios is higher, even though he's an archbishop. So that'll vary.
Whereas in the OSA, it's the opposite.
Yeah,
way.
metropolitan's the highest, you know, and then archbishop is under metropolitan. So, yeah.
Just to keep things more confusing.
Yeah. Okay, so we're clear on this, right? For the most part, we got all this down. Okay, so then I'll go this way. Oriental Orthodox. And this gets a little confusing. So somebody mentioned Armenia and Ethiopia.
Yeah, Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
isn't India also, they have it.
Yes.
Really? Cool.
And now I'm not sure what the order would be exactly because they don't have like the dictates.
Okay, so the Coptics are first, right?
Yeah, no one questions that. The Copts are
That's
first.
Like Syrian, right?
The Copts are first because Alexandria, you know, was under Constantinople. So for them, the Coptic Church is Alexandria. I guess the Syriacs would be second
Yeah, I think.
because they also claim Antioch. After that, it gets kind of hazy because
Yeah.
Number 2?
Syriac,
Syriac.
the Syriac Church.
Okay, but
In Syria.
Okay.
Yeah.
Assad is Coptic Christian.
Assad,
Isn't Assad
He's-
Coptic?
he's a Muslim.
No.
He's a Muslim?
Yeah.
He is
He's
a
Coptic.
he is
Wow.
he is a Muslim, but he's of a minority, a Muslim minority that has good relations with the different Christian groups that are
That's
there.
probably what I got that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they form like a minority coalition.
Actually, there might be a seventh.
I
Okay.
know India.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm not sure where they would fit. Okay, so someone mentioned Ethiopia. We'll definitely put them there. The Ethiopians are probably the largest of the Orientals, and they were granted a patriarch status this last century. So they're up there.
Armenia is probably up there too, right? They're probably-
Yeah, I'm just gonna now Armenia. also gets interesting because
They've been in and out of communion with us, right? There's been different times where they were part of us and in and out, right?
yeah, I'll get into that for sure. Yeah. Now Armenia, I don't think anyone was gonna guess this. So Armenia actually has two Catholicates, one in Etchmiadzin, which is Armenia. The other is Cilicia, which is actually now in Antilles, Lebanon. That had to do with the Armenian dynasty moving, and then they went back to Armenia and they decided to keep two. So there's technically two Armenian, I don't know if they consider themselves distinct churches, but they both have parishes over here, and they are administratively separate.
So there's the churches in Armenia, and then there's the churches that are like in Turkey and Lebanon, right?
Yeah.
Because if you go to parts of Turkey or parts of Lebanon, there's a ton of Armenians over there.
Right, yeah, especially Lebanon.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ones in Turkey would still be under Etchmiadzin, but they actually have a Constantinopolitan patriarchate that's autonomous. Isn't this fun?
It's so
That's how I know that they're Orthodox, because they're just as confusing as we are.
Don't
So-
their seminarians go to St. Vlad's?
Yeah, we have a lot of seminarians from the Oriental Orthodox churches at St. Vladimir's. The Armenians, though, specifically, they have their own seminary because they started it like decades ago, and they moved to New York. And so St. Vlad's helped them kind of get on their feet, and then eventually they got their own space. But they still come to St. Vladimir's for a lot of their class sessions and things like that. Yeah. So, and St. Vladimir's as a seminary has really kind of paved the way, I think, for a lot of this dialogue to take place. So, okay, someone said India, we'll just do that. Indian. They're also known as the Malankara. So we'll do that. And then the one I don't know if anyone was going to get was Eritrean. They were actually granted autocephaly in the 90s because of the civil war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And so I guess for the sake of keeping the peace, Eritrea was granted its own patriarch and as an autocephalous church. So, any more questions?
What about that churches in Uganda or these African nations?
Okay,
They're
sure.
okay.
So in Uganda and like in Nigeria, where hopefully we'll get a classmate of mine who's from there to come speak soon, they would be, if they're Eastern Orthodox, which he is, they'd be under the Patriarchate of Alexandria. Okay, but if they're Oriental, they could either be Coptic or Ethiopian. It just depends on which one of the churches down there has kind of gotten a stake hold.
What about Egypt? All Coptic?
No, it'd be Coptic and also the Alexandrian Patriarchate.
Okay.
So
But the Alexandrian Patriarchate's tiny compared to the Coptics,
it
right?
was. Well, in Egypt it definitely is. But they've actually done impressive missionary work within the last 100 years or so.
So most of their size now is outside of Egypt,
Yes.
right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I would say
Because
so.
most of the Alexandrian Patriarchate is Greeks who live in Alexandria, right?
Greeks and also people from Syria who migrated down.
Okay.
And that also brings up another point. These four patriarchates, oftentimes historically, are called the Greek Orthodox patriarchates. So even Antioch, here we call it Antiochian. But oftentimes on like encyclicals and stuff, you'll see the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch. And that's what it's referring to this. In Arabic, it's Rum, which actually means Roman. So
Yes,
it's Roman
so
Orthodox.
it's actually the Roman Patriarchate.
Yes, the Roman Orthodox Patriarchates of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. I've been told by Arabic speakers that Rum can actually apply to all these too. Because, we're all Eastern Orthodox or Rum Orthodox, because we're inheritors of the liturgical tradition of the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire. So, yeah.
So you will find people who are not Roman in any way, but will identify themselves as Romans because they're Orthodox.
Yeah, and in some Arabic dialects, Roman Catholics are called Latin, like they're just Latin. They're not even called Catholic or Roman. Some of them, for the Melkites who we mentioned before, they'll call them Rum Catholic, which means Roman Catholic. So yeah, I like words. Words are so fun.
I understand, I could be wrong,
Okay.
but in Italy, we have a Russian Orthodox church
Sure.
right close to Vatican.
Right.
And I'm given to believe that it was established by the wealthy and under the Tsarist days because they use a vacation in Italy. Am I wrong?
That I don't know the specific story with that, but I do know like that is a frequent thing that occurs in
We
terms
were at
of
that church.
The czar put that church.
yeah. I mean, it's possible.
It's not a huge church. We've been at it.
Yeah.
I missed the beginning, so maybe you already covered this.
Okay.
But, in general, are the Oriental Orthodox all Monophysites or Monothelites? There's another term. You know, some people are one will, some are one nature.
Yeah. So monophysite or monothelite, you got them right.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to say no, they are not. Even though we've called them that for a long time, but I'm gonna get into that.
Oh, okay.
Are they allowed to, with the bishop or the metropolitan, they can take communion?
Sometimes, yeah. So there's a lot of intercommuning agreements that are mostly conditional or geographical. It depends where you are, who your bishop is.
Let's talk about this a little bit, and then you can
Yeah.
go on to the theology stuff.
Okay, yeah. So basically, absolutely, officially, on paper, signed, sealed, and delivered, Alexandria and the Coptic Church and Antioch and the Syriac Church are allowed over in the homelands to intercommune. They can marry each other and only do one ceremony, so they can get married in either church.
And their kids get rights, right? So if they get married in one church and their kids get baptized in one church, their kids get rights to sacraments in the other church, right?
Yes,
Right?
yeah, they can go back and forth. Within the agreements between Syriac, with the Syriac Church and Antioch, they are allowed to pick godparents from the other church, which is kind of a big deal. I don't think that's the case here with the Copts and Alexandria. And then on a conditional level, varying churches have different policies. So I've been told, for example, at least Armenians that are under Echmiad Zine, I've been told as an Eastern Orthodox, I'm allowed to go up and receive on their end. Like they will just do it, as long as they know that I'm Eastern Orthodox. And let's see, I've been told by the Metropolitan of the Indian Church here that if my hierarch says it's okay, he's okay with me receiving.
Yeah, so this is the only group that we're not in communion, technically not in full communion with, where if you are somewhere and you can't get to communion, or there's not a church you can go to, you could go to most of these churches and receive communion, and it would be kosher, it'd be okay.
Yeah.
No, I mean, generally speaking, right?
Except for the Indian?
No, the Indian will do it a lot. Some of them are
Yeah.
more likely to be generous or easy to accept
Right.
than others.
Yeah. Because for some of them, it's like, oh, you're Eastern Orthodox, cool. Please come up. Others, it's, well, is your own church around here? And if it is, then you should go there. But if there's not, then they'll let you come up. So
Like if you were traveling to Ethiopia and you were like, I'm going to be there for like 2 months and I'm not going to have anywhere to go, maybe there's not churches, you could get a letter from your bishop
yeah,
and
that's
get
very important.
permission to go to communion in an Ethiopian church, and that would probably be recognized when you go there.
Yeah, but definitely make sure it's okay with your hierarch first, just in case. But yeah, there are plenty of examples even here in America where there's Oriental Orthodox who come to an area. The only churches around are Eastern, and so the local bishop says, okay, you can commune here while you're here. That happens very, very regularly. And also even the mode of officially receiving each other, like if someone's like, I'm Oriental but I want to be Eastern or vice versa, it's just statement of faith, which has in many ways turned into simply just stating the Nicene Creed with everyone else and then walking up to receive. I mean, that actually is like a legitimate mode of reception of each other. Yeah.
They all serve divine liturgy according to St. John Chrysostom.
No. In my liturgical rites lecture I gave back in February, I went through the varying rites that exist. So, for the most part, these all do the Byzantine rite that you just referred to, with a small handful of exceptions that we don't need to worry about now. The Orientals have 4 very distinct rites. So the Copts have their own liturgy, The Ethiopian Eritreans do their own
Theirs
liturgy.
is very different than
Yeah.
ours.
Yeah, the Syriacs and the Indians do their own liturgy, and then the Armenians have their own. When I say their own liturgy, I don't just mean like a different saint who did the anaphora. I mean like the structure of the liturgy is different. It's entirely different rite. So the liturgies are very, very visibly different. I mean, you can follow along essentially like, okay, I see they're doing the gospel reading. I see that, it's time for communion, things like that. But some of like the specifics and the prayers, and even just what's going on at the altar isn't always the same. All right. So, someone dropped the M word before, monophysite. Is it okay if I erase this, or should I maybe try to keep this up?
Go ahead and erase it if you're
Okay.
you're gonna need to draw more stuff.
Yeah. I definitely need to draw more stuff. All right. If anyone wants me to send them a list of this, just maybe write down your email for me. After I can send you the diptychs and information on these churches as well. All right. I'm gonna write.
Yes, Stephen, here does the church is listed by probably historical importance. If you were to put the real world as it is now, how would you list them in importance?
There are people who want to revise the diptychs, and it's a very I don't know the right word for it. Like even at the Council of Crete, some of the churches didn't.
Has very much to say about anything because it's broke and under the thumb of the Turks. Moscow is obviously very vocal, very active, with the population to back up what it says.
I've heard people say that they think Moscow should at least be higher on the diptychs, if not number one. Although, to be sure, 5 is pretty high, considering some of the churches under them were autocephalous before they were. But, so, I mean, they're, like, number 5, it's not like they're, like, really low down. That gets into all kinds of canonical issues. Even in my canon law class, my teacher was always like, no question, Constantinople is number 1. And this is a priest of the OCA who's, like, saying this. So, in terms of revising the diptychs, I guess that would have to be, like, something significant would need to occur, where a particular patriarchate has more prestige or has more ability to do things like help Christians that are persecuted in other countries. Yeah, the Patriarchate of Constantinople is largely a diasporal thing now. They have their various jurisdictions in America, in Western Europe, in Australia. They oversee churches of other jurisdictions too. Like here, Constantinople oversees Greek churches. It oversees some Albanian ones. It oversees the Carpatho-Russian and the Ukrainian ones. And it even has churches of its own that are just Constantinople ones. That's an ongoing, continual discussion that I don't really know if anyone has an answer for. But I know, like, the Council of Crete, there was a disagreement about how some of these people should be seated. And we all know that not everyone showed up to that. So,
I would think also that Jerusalem should be a little higher category these days.
But Antioch would tell you they should be lower, because Antioch doesn't like them right now. So I'm going to write some names of some people.
We need a different pen.
Do we?
You can't see
You
that.
can't see that one? Okay.
Use is there a black one?
There's blue and green and...
Anything that's
Oh, this is black. Yeah, Reed, Mark, Abel. Oh, I see what they did. Remarkable. Okay. I didn't see that book before. It looked different, so... Okay. So, I'm going to get into now why the Eastern and Oriental churches are not in communion with each other. So as I mentioned, we had a council in 431 of Ephesus, which is the third ecumenical council. This one, we both agree and are friends on, okay? 1, 2, and 3. So first is Nicaea, right? The second one is Constantinople. Third one is Ephesus. The reason I'm singling this one out, though, is because issues that started here kind of transpired into later. Ephesus condemned Nestorius,
Yeah.
who, there you go, who taught a very sharp distinction between the humanity and the divinity of Christ. It is a little unfortunate for him that it's called Nestorianism, because before him was Theodore of Mopsuestia, who was a lot more radical, who basically taught that there was two people that made up Christ, like in no uncertain terms. What Nestorius tried to do was harmonize Theodore with what I think he kind of knew the actual church taught, but he ended up being the one that got condemned.
Was Theodore of Mopsuestia, was he like a true adoptionist? Where there was like the two, like Christ came down and possessed the man Jesus?
Yep.
That's his thing, right?
Yeah, it'd be like they have different
I've heard that
preferences.
Yeah, so
of
if somebody
things.
came to you and was like, there's the man Jesus and the God Christ came down and possessed him and took him over, would you say that sounds right or wrong? Right? That doesn't sound quite right.
Anathema,
See, you
right?
guys are more Orthodox than you think.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so nobody likes this guy. Well,
Yeah,
that's not
know
true,
about
but
this guy. I didn't know about the other guy.
yeah, so Eastern and Oriental Orthodox don't like either of these guys.
And Nestorius doesn't teach exactly what Theodore taught, right?
Right, he tries to harmonize it with what I guess we would now call the Cyrillian Christology, but he's still very much, he won't go as far as talking about an actual incarnation. In one of his homilies, he actually says, like, the Word did not become incarnate. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's kind of problematic.
Sorry, but thank you.
No problem. It'll be on YouTube, so you can look it up. Where we have a divergence is 451, only 20 years later. The Ecumenical Council of Chalcedon, or Chalcedon, or, you know, however
That's if you want to
say
sound
it.
smarter than someone.
Yeah, or Chalcedon. I love when people say that. I used to say it that way, so it's okay. So a lot happened in these 20 years. So what we have is another heretic named Eutyches. I'll go over here. He was teaching that the humanity of Christ was swallowed up by his divinity.
So there was nothing human really left.
Right.
Right.
He may have had like a physical, real body,
And
but that doesn't mean anything in
That would
terms of the
render-
nature.
That would
It's
render
just
the crucifixion. No. There's no point in crucifixion if there's no.
right. There's no point
humanity
in
of Christ.
or the passion or anything. Yeah. So Eutyches taught that, and so Chalcedon was mainly concerned with condemning him, but there were other issues. So in between here, there was another synod. It was a local council in 449, also held in Ephesus. Some people call it Ephesus II, but I think the Orientals actually refer to it as Ephesus II, where Dioscorus, who was the Patriarch of Alexandria, or the Pope of Alexandria, since Alexandria used the term Pope for their patriarch, and still do. He was really mad at a guy named Theodoret.
Be thankful your mom didn't name you that.
Right? Theodoret kind of sided with Nestorius at first, and so Dioscorus didn't like that. There were a few other administrative issues that were going on, but basically, Dioscorus did not like Pope Leo of Rome. And Theodoret was good friends with Leo. So this council was held basically to condemn Theodoret and a few other people that are not really relevant to the conversation. I think, actually no. I think Flavian as well, who was a bishop from Constantinople, was accused of having Nestorian leanings. And the guards that went to get him, they beat him up so bad he died. Which was not okay. And it ends up that he really wasn't
So
a
you thought
heretic.
church history was boring, right?
Right, yeah. So all this going into Chalcedon because a lot of people in Constantinople and elsewhere liked Flavian, and they were like, no, he's not a heretic. He's not an historian. So by Chalcedon, we're wanting to condemn Eutyches. Dioscorus shows up to Chalcedon, but he's not happy because Theodoret is put back into his episcopacy. And he doesn't like that.
How long did Chalcedon last? How long did it
Ooh, less than a year, but
Yeah, these councils would last months and months.
some of them would, yeah. And sometimes you'll see the dating of some of them. They'll say slash, like 1 year and then another year because they go through the new year. I don't remember offhand, but it was quite an ordeal.
Wasn't Chalcedon the highest attended
It's
of the council?
possible, I believe so.
Yeah, I think it had the most bishops, I think, at any.
I'm trying to remember because I know there are some local synods that have had more hierarchs than some of the ecumenical ones, but I don't think Chalcedon. Yeah, I think it was fairly highly attended. So Theodoret's put back in power. Dioscorus is just not happy about that, but he's there because Dioscorus and Eutyches were actually friends initially. I forgot to mention that. So during the course of the council, Dioscorus realizes that Eutyches is actually a heretic. So like I said, Eutyches teaches that the humanity was swallowed up by the divinity. Oh no, I'm losing this one.
I have to get some new markers.
Yeah.
All right, Blake.
So this is, the term monophysite usually refers to the Eutychian heresy of there being no humanity in Christ, or at least if there was, it got swallowed up.
Yeah, I've heard that term, just didn't know about that guy.
Yes.
Okay, so-
Now, the reason Dioscorus sided with him, though, originally, is because Eutyches used a term that's really important that I'm going to write on the board big in blue.
That blue you're using before.
Yeah. Miaphysis, or miaphysis. This term was used by Cyril of Alexandria, Saint Cyril, possibly Saint Athanasius of Alexandria. So this was a very big expression within the Alexandrian church. What this meant was that the humanity and the divinity of Christ came together and they united into one incarnate nature that was fully human and fully divine. Now, that is the Christology of St. Cyril of Alexandria. So within this, the humanity and the divinity are both perfectly intact. There's nothing about mixture or separating or one swallowing the other up. So the fact that Eutyches used this same word made Dioscorus think, oh, of course, he's a Cyrillian. But then when he started talking more, he realized, like, oh, okay, you're actually not saying what Cyril said. He publicly stated that Eutyches deserved to be punished and die, and then he was still mad about the Theodoret issue, but then it got worse. Leo of Rome has a tome, which...
Just use the blue.
Okay.
You're not gonna get it.
Okay, so the Tome of Leo is a perfectly Orthodox document that describes the two natures of Christ. But out of context, it could sound somewhat problematic if you don't have it within like the Cyrillian mindset and like what other church fathers say, right? I mean, that's kind of like Patristics 101. You never take what one father says and isolate it from the context of other fathers, right? And so Dioscorus didn't like the wording of the Tome of Leo because it talked about how in his humanity he does this, in his divinity he does this. He said that sounded too much like a separation. So he just refused to accept this or to acknowledge it. And remember, they already didn't like each other anyway. So now he's just like, I'm not having it. Eventually, Dioscorus left. So he pieced out of the council. And therefore, after he left, he was deposed from his see. And Chalcedon rightfully condemned.
Was Dioscorus the Pope of
Alexandria
at the time? So yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Sorry, so some of the information is coming out, and then I realized I didn't include a detail, but yeah. So this is Pope Pope of Alexandria, and Pope of Rome is Leo. Okay, now Leo is a saint in our church. Dioscorus is a saint in the Oriental church, churches. So he gets deposed, but he's not condemned for heresy at the council, because the main heretic is Eutyches. So
What's the main difference? Because of all these problems then? with
Yeah.
the Oriental? So
Mhm.
do they believe that there is a dual
nature.
presence? Yeah, dual
Yeah,
nature?
yeah. So
Maybe you should contrast.
That's not integrated.
So you should
Right.
contrast meaphysis
Okay.
with diaphysis right now.
yes,
And contrast those two because that's the difference. They're meaphysis, we're diaphysis.
right. And so the
So-
Tome of Leo used the expression diophysis, which was also what Nestorius used. Another reason why Dioscorus didn't like that. So, basically, all right, I think we have all this down. I have a transmitter. In the Miaphysis, in that formula of Miaphysis, right, they say that Christ is from two natures, as opposed to in two natures, which is the diaphysite.
Okay, so just to understand what's going on here is that
Yeah.
the difference in our theology is ek versus en.
Yeah, because
That's the difference.
That's the difference. So ek in Greek means from, and en means in.
Yep.
That is the disagreement. So just
Well, that's where it starts. Right?
yeah, I mean there's
Yeah.
more to it, but if you want to boil it down real simple,
So we could have just put a typo.
Yeah.
Centuries just because someone.
And also, respective heretics that were genuine heretics used both these terms, so it was confusing.
yeah, no, that's really good to point out because from our perspective, there was a heretic who was using ek, right, to say
And Miaphysis,
And
Eutyches and Apollinarius before him. Yeah. And then Nestorius used Diophysis. I can't remember if Theodore of Mopsuestia actually said that or
so.
not.
Both these terms have been tainted by other heretics, which cause the other side
Yep.
to not trust their usage.
There you go.
So no one uses this usage now because it's too confusing.
Oh, we do. Well, I mean, at least at the seminary we do. Yeah, I mean, you see it in patristic writings and everything. I think now that most of us speak English, we've just kind of like, we've tailored our language. So even I've been told that the word nature, which is what feces means, is not super accurate. But I'm like, all right, well, that's the word that we use. You know what I mean? It's like, but no, if you talk to people in the Oriental churches, they will say Christ is from two natures.
Okay.
But then they'll say, I mean, the natures are united in one. But that one is not canceling the other out. They're both there.
I'm sorry,
And we-
Father Deacon, I have to go.
Oh, no problem. No
That's
problem.
interesting.
And we say it's
In two natures, just full stop.
Right.
teenagers and stop right there.
Yeah.
So,
See-
sort of.
See if you can show how those two come from different places, but when you talk about them, they almost end up saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, to show
It's
that
easier
them.
to explain than it is to draw. I'm finding this out right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah.
But at the end, it's not going to really lead to the same place. The outcome's going to be different. If it's saying from and in, right?
You'll see how they explain it. Go and
Yeah.
explain it. You'll see how they almost end up saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Duality and
So, I mean, you know, in two natures, I mean, so we say what? We say, you know, Christ obviously was able to suffer, to die, he thirsted, he hungered, because he's human, right? Because of his human nature.
right.
But he worked miracles, he was able to resurrect.
Sin.
Yeah, because of his divine nature. Okay? But they say the same thing, except that the natures just aren't separated. And they're not for us either. I mean, really, the only difference has to do with saying that he's now from two in one, and that we just say in two.
Yeah, so what happens is they'll say he's from two natures, and these two natures are perfectly united.
Yeah.
And we will say, you know, as one, so that they're one nature.
Yeah.
And then we will say, well, there are two natures that are perfectly united.
Hypostatic union, which they also use that term too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, so like the difference is like that. I mean, it's like you're barely on
Right.
either side of the.
Exactly.
Like personal confusion.
In,
Is that something that can be overcome?
a lot of the major theologians on both sides have acknowledged it. It's just like there's a,
Yeah, well, because I would say that this issue, and we've had councils in the 60s and 70s where we
Yeah.
met, and the major theological issue was resolved there. Okay?
Yeah.
And agreements was reached. The real problem of union, and you can talk about this later, is not this theology.
no, it's not.
It's not. It's other
It's
stuff.
It's not. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
other
yeah.
stuff. So.
So yeah. So after Chalcedon, you know, as this is going on, people are sort of kind of arguing past each other, and I think in a lot of ways it simply became about, well, do you accept the council or do you not?
Kind of
and
like today in politics, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there were some other issues because obviously a lot of people in Egypt and Syria were not satisfied with the deposition of Dioscorus. And so later on, I think the key figure who I wrote my thesis on is Severus of Antioch. And he was in the mid 6th century, and he had been actually the patriarch of Antioch. But he did not accept the Council of Chalcedon. And he thought it was problematic because, well, one of the deposition of Dioscorus, and he felt that the in two natures formula was too much like Nestorianism, you know, et cetera, et cetera. He eventually fled to Alexandria, where there was a lot of sympathy for that movement there, and he even had an audience with the emperor Justinian and his wife Theodora. Stayed at their house, the palace, and everything, but they didn't reach an agreement. Theodora, though, was very sympathetic to the non-Chalcedonians, and so it was Severus who actually set up the first churches that were officially non-Chalcedonian, that were distinct from the Church of the Empire, with the express permission of Theodora. So some people point out to me, well, okay, so Severus is the one who severed the church. You see what they did there? But that, like, it's a problem that he intentionally set up separate churches. But the other issue is that the canonical empress, and of course the emperor too, obviously, even if it was just watching it occur, let them do it. So that's a whole other issue.
Yeah, so like the Orthodox Church, our church sanctioned them setting up, I mean, you know, because the emperor, through the emperor, sanctioned them setting up their own parallel jurisdictions.
Right. Even though there was a local synod that did condemn Severus, it was only a local one at first, they still just let him do it. And after that is when things got really bad and complicated. So eventually it wasn't until the Sixth Ecumenical Council, which you will see oftentimes as 680/681, where Severus and Dioscorus were actually officially condemned as heretics. It wasn't until the Sixth Council.
Okay, so why is
They've been
that?
dead for a while.
So talk about why that's important. Like, why is that a big deal?
I think the Fifth and Sixth Councils were held to try and reconcile with the non-Chalcedonians, but the problem was there were other heresies popping up that they were trying to address as well, and so nobody was really satisfied. So the Monothelite heresy was mentioned earlier. Well, what the Monothelite heresy was that, okay, Christ has two natures, but he only has one will, and that's the divine will. There were people who approached some of the non-Chalcedonians that were in the line of Dioscorus who said, hey, see, this can be a compromise. But they're like, no, because we don't believe that. And so that was a problem. And then by this point, I mean, the actual schism has been like a little over 100 years now. Severus and Dioscorus are long dead. So their memory in the mind of the Byzantine Empire is like, you know, it's tainted.
And so we should talk about how it's a bit dubious to be condemning somebody after they're dead.
Sure.
Because canonically, you're supposed to issue summons, and they're supposed to come and be able to give a defense. And
Right.
so if they can't defend themselves, and you condemn, so
Sure.
it's a bit, you know.
Well, to be fair, that did happen with Severus.
Okay.
The problem was he was still allowed to start his own churches with the consent of the imperial couple, even though they did say, like, this is a problem that you're not accepting this. And that a local synod at the time, in like the late 500s, did condemn him. But local synods don't carry as much weight as ecumenical ones. But you don't know if they're ecumenical until after the fact, right? So Severus is, he's probably what a lot of things hinge on in terms of the ecclesiological implications. Because he was the first to start his own churches after technically being condemned at a local level, but the same emperor who convened that council still was like okay with him starting his own. Because if anyone knows anything about the emperor Justinian, he did not like anyone outside the church to like exist and tax them heavily, and so that, at least at first, was not the case with them. Dioscorus, again, it was more of an administrative thing at Chalcedon, and I think just by association, eventually, he gets thrown in there. But Dioscorus never really wrote much of anything that was theological. So in a lot of people's minds, when they're talking about Dioscorus, they're really talking about Eutyches, who actually blatantly taught heresy. And so this just gets kind of...
So it's a misnomer to call the non-Chalcedonian Christians, the Oriental Orthodox, monophysites.
It is.
Because monophysite is, properly speaking, the theology of Eutyches, which
Yes.
they have roundly and consistently condemned from the beginning.
In some of their services, they even have anathemas against him. So they don't like him either.
So could you talk about like what the real causes or the real things that prevent union today?
Yeah, for
because
sure.
the condemnations you have there, I think, and in terms of causes for the schism, it's also, there's a lot of cultural stuff going on there too, because a lot of the people from the provinces that supported the Miaphysites were also sort of felt persecuted and marginalized by the empire. They spoke different dialects of Greek. They weren't as they were like
that's a good thing.
bumpkin Greeks, you know, and they weren't as Roman as the Romans in Constantinople.
That's a good thing to point out, is that some people say that it was just a linguistics thing, but everyone was still speaking Greek. But as Father said, there were variations of that Greek. And even some of the terms that were used carried a different meaning with some of these groups. So I think one of the major issues are the anathemas, regardless of when they came about, of, for theirs, it's Dioscorus and Severus specifically.
And who they condemned of our saints?
They condemn, Leo of Rome, and I'm trying to remember who else is like officially named. Because there's even like, I think in the Armenian ordination service, it says like, do you condemn Leo and Nestorius and all those who taught a separation of natures? And it's in classical Armenian, so nobody knows what's going on. But, I know they don't really like Justinian, but I don't know that he's officially condemned. But Leo for sure is on their list.
And so why are these anathemas a problem today? Like, why can't we just say, hey, let's just wipe it all away and just say, forget about it?
Yeah, well, on both sides, this comes
Kickbacks,
up.
you know?
Right. So for one, we haven't been in official communion for, let's say, 1,400 years. Well, why now? Why all of a sudden do we know better now that we believe the same things? I think that's a valid thing to ask. It's very scandalous to a lot of people to say, oh, we have been split, right? If it's true that we're both Orthodox, then that means the one true church, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, has been split in two for like a millennium and a half. But I feel weird just saying that. Even though I believe that they are fully Orthodox, I'm around them all the time. I have many friends that are Oriental Orthodox. One of the main people who got me into Orthodoxy is, I think now, he was just made a priest a couple days ago in the Ethiopian church. So I have a great love for them. But even just saying that out loud, it just feels weird because it defies the ecclesiology of both churches to say that another group could still be Orthodox, fully apostolic and Catholic and hold the true faith, but just not be in union with us. So, I mean, it's very problematic.
Yeah, it challenges an ecclesiology for which we haven't thought through the consequences of well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that,
Ignored it, Father.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's potential that we could, if we really
Sure.
did more thinking and more articulation on our ecclesiology, come to some ideas and concepts that could help guide us, but we just haven't done that.
Right.
So,
So actually, really, one of the actual things that is preventing union is just the separation itself. Like, you know, like we just said, it's been so long, why now? It's interesting because you find several times throughout history, people from either side are like kind of dialoguing with someone, and they're like, oh, you're not so bad. You know, but that's kind of like a one-to-one level. Even St. John of Damascus, who, late 6th century, I believe, maybe early 7th, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he worked for the caliphate at the time, after, you know, they had like some of the Muslim invasions, and he wrote about the so-called Monophysites, which were them, and he says, they are Orthodox in every single other way. Like, how often does that happen? You know? And there was also a dialogue with the Armenians. I think it was the 12th century. Saint Nerses, who the Armenian seminary that we work with is named after. He was ready to be like, we're okay with Chalcedon, like, let's do this. He even said, like, I don't really understand why we oppose this to begin with. Now, Armenia's case is slightly different because they weren't at Chalcedon. They weren't even an autocephalous church. They were like a Catholicate of the Patriarchate of Antioch at the time. And then they were going through a war. So they were kind of busy. So they found out about the whole thing later. So they didn't even officially become non-Chalcedonian until at least a few decades, if not further, than some of the other Orientals. But, you know, once they were, then they were solid as non-Chalcedonians. But they've usually been the ones to kind of lead and like, is Chalcedon really that bad, guys? But there were other things going on at the time. You know, the Crusades were going on, and Armenia was at war with other people. So that actually never came to fruition. But the problem is that any of the dialogues in the past, up until this last century, were like one church to another church. It wasn't until the 20th century representatives from all the autocephalous churches on either side sat down with each other and were like, all right, what's the deal? And then that's when it came about. Because
Now, you don't have the distance, so you can communicate through the internet.
yeah.
The communication is 300 times better. So
Right.
You don't have to physically be in one place.
Even when this started, I think the first unofficial dialogue was what, the 1960s maybe? Even then, the technology was more advanced than it was, you know, obviously several hundred years ago.
and you can go and you can read all the proceedings of. There were maybe 6 or 7 of these meetings that they had. These theological meetings. You can go in the Greek Orthodox Theological Review. They're all there,
Right.
and you can go and you can read them. And it's actually kind of interesting because you realize how quickly they are like.
Thanks.
They agree on stuff and how quickly they find commonality. It's
Right.
it's really remarkable. I mean, there are some issues they fight about, but it's
Right.
amazing the progress they make.
Father, can we talk about this at another separate meeting about the Oriental and the Eastern Orthodox Church today in a separate session? Because it's getting late. I have to go home, and I'm interested in hearing all this. But can we invite, yes?
I was saying, if you want me to come back and do a second session, I can do
I
that.
would like to
Yeah.
know about today in the
Sure.
20 and 21st century.
Oh wow, I didn't realize I went that long. This is longer than my liturgical lecture.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about let's just stop there and maybe you
Yeah.
can come back sometime.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
And do it, the recent, what's happening in the churches today, and who are the major people involved in this discussion?
Yeah, that's important.
Each place,
Okay.
because there are names, and let's know some of those personalities of who is involved in these discussions, and where are they going?
Sure. I think it's a great idea.
That sounds good. All right.
Awesome.
Okay,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
this was excellent.
Yeah, so we have the